Geoff Barton is General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders. He joins us from Bury St Edmunds. Morning to you. First
Morning,
of all, why do school uniforms have to be branded?
It's a good question. I can feel the strength of feeling from those parents you're speaking to there, Sally. I think one of the things about the UK education system compared to lots of bits of the world is we've always had this feeling that two things should happen. That whatever your background, however much you earn, you should look pretty much the same in the way you dress as other young people who may come from richer and poorer families. That was the principle of uniform. And in the long term, the idea is that that actually costs parents less because you're wearing the same uniform largely every day. That's the first principle. And the second principle is to give a sense of identity, that you belong to a particular school, you're identifiable, you feel proud of that school. Those are the two kind of non-negotiable principles. But of course, what that comes up against is how far do you go with that? And that's exactly what we've just been hearing being articulated by those parents there.
Geoff, the law changed in England, didn't it, recently, which supposedly means that schools have to go for more generic uniforms and don't insist on branding and logos and emblems and that kind of thing. But from the parents we've heard from, that doesn't seem to be the case everywhere. They're still being charged for bespoke uniforms, a lot of money.
That's right. The Department for Education brought out statutory guidance in November 2021. It's just worth reminding ourselves, John, that November 2021, there was still debate about whether kids should be wearing face coverings, one-way systems and all of that. There was a lot on schools' plates then, but nevertheless, there was a request that governing bodies should spend time reviewing their uniform policy. And what I would say is, having spent yesterday afternoon just trawling through websites looking to see whether schools I knew had been doing that, the evidence I've seen is largely that schools have been doing it. Now, you might say, well, why have parents not noticed that? Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, there has to be a consultation if you're going to change your uniform policy, and if you have got a particular supplier and you're going to end a contract, that isn't going to happen straight away. And the government has therefore issued further guidance this summer saying a reminder that you need to be looking at this. And that's why my second point, parents may not have seen any of this happening until this September, because if you're locked into a particular contract, if you've made changes to your uniform, if you're introducing that, you're probably going to introduce it to some year groups, the younger students, rather than the older ones anyway. So there'll be some parents who think nothing has changed here, whereas it's probably going to affect the younger students who are coming into that particular school, none of which takes away the concerns parents will have about some overuse of branded uniforms, but it might just help to explain why they haven't necessarily seen the changes that they might have assumed were going to happen.
So for parents who are stuck, who simply cannot afford at this point, I know this is the time of year when lots of people are buying new uniform, for the people who can't afford it, what are their options?
Well, I think there's probably a couple of things there, Sally. One of the things that the guidance said back in 2021, it said again in the non-statutory guidance in 2023, is an expectation that what schools have got is some kind of swap shop or whatever they call it, whereby a youngster who is leaving the school essentially donates into a pool their uniform. Schools are being required to do that, and it might be that schools haven't articulated clearly that that's available, that should be available. And the second thing, which again the guidance says really clearly, and I would reinforce, is if you've got a concern about this, if you think that the school is using too many branded items, if you can't see why there's branded socks and branded shorts, etc., and why those haven't disappeared, then there is due process. And the guidance says, get in touch at the lowest level with the school directly, and that would be the governing body. I would write to the chair of governors saying, this is what we were expecting, a review of uniform policy. Can you just tell us whether that's happened? And the websites I was looking at yesterday were quite explicit that whereas there had been an expectation about branded sports uniforms, quite a lot of the places I was looking at have got rid of that. And it might be there's a communication issue just to reaffirm that to parents.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that was one thing that lots of parents have told us that they're particularly frustrated by. That they're saying, look, we understand they might have to have a school uniform, we understand they might have to have a sports top, but why on earth would socks or shorts have to be branded and therefore more expensive?
I totally get that. You know, I was a head teacher for 15 years, and in the early days of that headship, starting back in 2002, there was a very strong emphasis on schools competing one with another. One way that you competed was to show that your uniform was a better uniform, that your youngsters were more proud of your school. And back in the day, we had branded shorts for kids who are going playing against other schools. Nowadays, partly I think because of the cost of living crisis, partly because social attitudes have changed, it would seem to me unthinkable in the school where I was leading that we would continue to do that. And that's why I think the guidance from the government was helpful, but also why governing boards working with head teachers will generally and frequently be reviewing uniform. And if parents think, actually, we want the uniform expectations of our school to mirror a more informal sense of what society expects, then the governors are there on your behalf, and you should be getting in touch with governors saying, can we have a discussion about this on behalf of the parent body?
OK, Geoff Barton, thank you very much indeed for joining us.